I still remember the exact tone of her voice. Not angry, not loud, just flat. Then divorce me. She didn't even look up when she said it. Her eyes stayed on her phone, thumb scrolling like she was killing time. And for a second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her because people don't usually say something like that unless they're trying to hurt you. But she wasn't trying to hurt me. That was the problem. I stood there in our kitchen, the one we remodeled together 5 years ago. I could still picture us picking out the countertop like it mattered, like we were building something. The overhead lights were too bright, the refrigerator hummed in the background, and there was a tiny crack in the wall by the doorway we'd never fixed. My brain latched onto details because it didn't want to process the sentence. I asked her to say it again. She let out a slow, irritated breath, the kind you give when someone is forcing you to repeat something you think should be obvious. I said, "If you're that unhappy, then divorce me." There was no tremble in her voice, no fear, no sadness. She said it like a dare, like she was calling my bluff, even though I hadn't meant it as a bluff. Because our arguments had always followed the same pattern. I would bring up distance, how we felt like roommates. She would say she was tired, stressed, busy. I would ask what changed, and she'd tell me nothing changed, I was just overthinking. Then she'd turn it around and make me feel like I was the problem for wanting something basic: affection, interest, respect. And every time I pushed, she'd throw the same word at me: dramatic. I had swallowed that word for years. I told myself marriage was supposed to be hard. I told myself love wasn't supposed to feel like excitement forever. I told myself we were just in a phase. But that sentence, "then divorce me," didn't feel like a phase. It felt like the truth finally slipping out because she was tired of pretending. I didn't react right away. I just looked at her, waiting for the part where she softened. The part where she laughed and said she didn't mean it. The part where she reached for me, even just a little, to show there was still something here. Nothing. She kept staring at that screen like I was background noise. So I said it, calmly, almost politely. "Okay." Her thumb stopped mid-scroll. She looked up, and for the first time that night I could see her trying to calculate what I meant. "Okay." "What?" "Okay," I repeated. "I'll divorce you." The silence that followed wasn't the normal silence we had in our house, not the quiet of routine. It was the silence of someone realizing they pushed a button they didn't expect to work. Her mouth opened like she was about to laugh again, but it didn't come out right. She tried to smirk, but it looked forced. "You're being dramatic," she said like she was reaching for the old script. And that's when something in me finally clicked. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was clarity. I nodded once, slow, as if I was agreeing with her, as if we were discussing something boring. "I'll call a lawyer tomorrow." I said it like I was talking about setting up an appointment, like I was ordering groceries, like this was just the next step in a plan. She stared at me and her expression shifted again, from dismissive to wary. Not because she suddenly loved me, because she suddenly didn't feel in control. And I realized something that made my stomach tighten. She had said, "then divorce me," many times before. In different words, in different fights. She'd used it like a weapon because she knew it worked. She knew it scared me. She knew I would back down. She never thought I'd actually do it. That night, she went to bed without another word. No apology, no conversation, no attempt to fix anything. Just the sound of the bedroom door closing softly, like she was certain this would blow over by morning. I stayed in the kitchen alone, staring at the crack in the wall, listening to the refrigerator hum and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the peaceful kind, the cold kind, the kind that shows up when you finally accept that the thing you were fighting for is already gone. And then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my phone, went to my notes, and started writing down dates. Little moments, small humiliations, conversations I used to excuse, things she said that didn't sit right, times she made me feel crazy for noticing, because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a clean breakup. I knew the second I took her dare seriously, she would rewrite the story and make me the villain. And I also knew something else. There was a reason she was so comfortable daring me to leave, a reason she wasn't afraid. And I was about to find out exactly what that reason was. The next morning, before I even had the chance to call a lawyer, I saw a notification on her phone that made my hands go cold because it wasn't meant for me to ever see. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was sad, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, that sentence replayed in my head. Then divorce me. It sounded different now, less like frustration, more like confidence. I woke up before my alarm and lay there listening to the house. The air felt different, like something heavy had finally lifted, but underneath it was a tight knot I couldn't explain yet. She was still asleep beside me, turned away, phone charging on the nightstand. I watched her for a moment, waiting to feel regret. It never came. Instead, memories started lining up in my head, one after another, like they'd been waiting for permission to speak. Our marriage didn't fall apart overnight. It eroded slowly, quietly, in ways that were easy to dismiss if you didn't want to see them. At first, it was small things. She stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing details about hers. Conversations turned into logistics, groceries, bills, schedules. I told myself this was normal. Everyone says long marriages become routines. Everyone says passion fades and stability takes its place. But stability isn't supposed to feel like loneliness. There were nights I sat right next to her on the couch while she laughed at something on her phone, and I felt like a guest in my own living room. When I asked what was funny, she'd say nothing and keep smiling at the screen. I noticed how protective she became of that phone. Always face down, always on silent, always with her. When I mentioned it once lightly, she rolled her eyes and accused me of being paranoid. Asked me if I wanted to go through her messages like some insecure teenager. I apologized. That became another pattern. I noticed something. She dismissed it. I apologized for noticing. Over time, I learned not to ask certain questions, not to bring up certain feelings, not to push, because pushing always led to the same ending. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Why do you always do this? If you're so unhappy, maybe we shouldn't be together. She said that last one more than once, and every time she watched my reaction carefully. I always backed down, until I didn't. That morning, she finally woke up and acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee. She checked her emails. She spoke to me in that neutral, polite tone people use when they assume everything will reset. I realized something then. In her mind, last night wasn't a turning point. It was just another argument she expected to win by default. When I mentioned calling a lawyer again, casually over breakfast, her hand froze around her mug. "Are you still on that?" she asked, half amused, half annoyed. "Yes." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're really going to throw everything away because of one sentence." One sentence. I wanted to list all the others, all the moments, all the times she made me feel small for wanting to feel chosen, but I didn't. I told her I was going to work, grabbed my keys, and left the house with my heart pounding harder than it had in years. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving forward. At the office, I couldn't focus. I opened my notes again and added more dates. Trips she took that felt strange in hindsight. Late nights she blamed on work. Changes in her routines that I brushed off because trusting her felt easier than questioning her. And then, around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. Short, casual. "We need to talk tonight." I stared at the screen, and something about the timing felt off. Because less than a minute later, another notification popped up. This one wasn't meant for me. And in that instant, I understood why she'd never been afraid of daring me to leave. I didn't open the notification right away. I just stared at my phone, heart thudding, because I already knew it wasn't supposed to be there. Her phone was synced to our shared tablet at home. It had been for years, mostly for photos, calendars, harmless things. I'd forgotten about it completely. She probably had too, until that moment. The preview was short, just one line. "Last night was close. Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? I read it again. Slowly. Carefully. My first instinct was to make excuses for her, even then. To tell myself it could mean something else. Work. A misunderstanding. A bad joke taken out of context. But my hands were already cold. I opened it. There was no name saved, just a number. And the messages above it filled in the gaps my brain didn't want to. They weren't explicit. Not romantic in the way movies make affairs look. No hearts, no dramatic confessions. They were worse. Casual, comfortable, familiar. Plans that assumed privacy. References to when things settle. Little jokes that only make sense when two people have history. And the timestamp on the first message punched the air out of my lungs. It went back months, not days, not weeks, months. Suddenly, everything rearranged itself. The late nights, the phone on silent, the trips that felt rushed and oddly timed. She wasn't distant because she was tired. She was distant because she was elsewhere. I closed the messages and sat there, staring at my desk, feeling something strange rise up through the shock. Not rage, clarity. For years I'd wondered what I was doing wrong. Why I felt like I was constantly auditioning for my own wife's attention. Why she spoke to me like I was a burden. Now I knew. I wasn't competing with work, or stress, or exhaustion. I was competing with someone who didn't have to deal with real life with her. I didn't confront her, not then. Instead, I scrolled back through my notes and added one more line. The date she started changing. Because that was the day everything stopped being an accident. By the time I got home that evening, she was already there, sitting at the table. Calm, composed, like she'd practiced this conversation in her head. She told me she'd been thinking all day, that maybe things had gotten out of hand, that she didn't mean what she said. I watched her face carefully as she spoke. She apologized for her tone, not her words. She said she felt overwhelmed, that she didn't feel heard, that she needed space to figure things out. And then she said something that made my stomach turn. I just need to know, you're not actually going to do something stupid, right? Stupid. Like respecting myself, like taking her at her word. I asked her one question. Is there someone else? She didn't answer right away. She looked away, adjusted her chair, took a breath. Too many movements. Too much time. No, she said. Too quickly. I nodded. Not because I believed her. Because I didn't need to argue anymore. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone again. Same kitchen, same crack in the wall, same hum of the refrigerator. Only now, everything made sense. And I realized something else. She wasn't afraid of divorce because she didn't think I'd leave. She wasn't afraid because she already had a backup plan, and I wasn't part of it. So I opened my laptop, searched for divorce attorneys, and picked the one whose bio mentioned one thing that mattered more than anything else. Discretion. The next morning, I made the call. And while the phone rang, I noticed something that hadn't hit me yet. She hadn't asked if I was okay. She hadn't asked if I was hurt. She'd only asked if I was going to do something that affected her. That was when I understood. The moment I filed, the story would change. And I would become the villain in it. But I was done trying to save a marriage that only existed on my side. Because soon, she was going to realize something she never planned for. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't alone in this anymore. The lawyer didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed. He listened while I talked, while I explained the fight, the sentence she threw at me like it meant nothing, the months of distance, the messages I wasn't supposed to see. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, didn't try to push me toward any dramatic move. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. Then he said something simple. People don't say, then divorce me, unless they've already imagined life on the other side. That sentence stayed with me, because it explained everything. From that point on, things started moving fast, even though emotionally it felt like I was walking through mud. Papers, dates, questions I never thought I'd answer. And quietly, without any announcement, the shift happened. She sensed it before she saw it. She started asking where I was going after work, who I was talking to, why I was suddenly so calm. It wasn't concern, it was surveillance. One evening, she asked directly if I'd spoken to a lawyer. I didn't deny it. Her face tightened just for a second before she masked it with disbelief. "You actually did it," she said, half laughing. "Wow, you're really committed to blowing up our lives." Our lives. I noticed how quickly it became plural again when consequences entered the room. That same week, her tone changed completely. She started being nicer, cooking dinners she hadn't cooked in years, asking how my day was, touching my arm when she passed by. It felt rehearsed, like someone trying to recreate a version of themselves they no longer remembered how to be. Then the calls started. Her sister reached out first, then her mother. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They told me she was struggling, that she was confused, that marriage required patience. None of them asked what I'd been dealing with. None of them asked why I was done. The story was already circulating, and it wasn't mine. In her version, she'd said something in the heat of the moment, and I'd taken it too far. I was cold, unforgiving, unwilling to fight for my marriage. I heard myself described as impulsive. That almost made me laugh. I'd spent years not acting. One night, after another call from her mother, I sat down with my notes again. This time, I didn't add dates. I added names, people she'd spoken to, people who suddenly had opinions about my marriage, people who clearly knew more than they should. And that's when something unsettling clicked. She hadn't just prepared for life after me. She'd prepared an audience, friends who knew her side, family already positioned to support her, a narrative that painted her as blindsided, all while daring me to leave. That night, I confronted her again. Not about the affair. Not yet. I asked her one question. "Who have you been talking to about us?" She froze. Not completely. Just enough. Then she sighed and said I was being paranoid again. That she needed support because I was shutting her out. There it was. The same tactic. The same word. But it didn't land this time. Because now I could see the pattern. She didn't just want control over the marriage. She wanted control over the aftermath, and suddenly, the messages I'd seen earlier felt less like a betrayal, and more like a warning. She hadn't been planning to fix things, she'd been planning to land safely, and the closer I got to filing, the more I realized something unsettling. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the version of the story where she was innocent. And soon, she was going to realize she wasn't the only one keeping records anymore. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every interaction started to feel staged, like I was walking through scenes she'd already rehearsed with someone else. The smiles, the softness, the sudden concern for my feelings. It wasn't affection coming back. It was damage control. One night she asked if we could just talk. No lawyers, no pressure. Just us. We sat on opposite sides of the couch. The same couch where we'd spent countless nights watching shows without really watching them. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped like she was about to confess something important. She told me she felt like she was losing everything, that she was scared, that she never thought I'd actually walk away. I listened without interrupting. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "You know I never meant to hurt you." That sentence hung in the air, because intent doesn't erase impact. I asked her calmly if there was anything she wanted to tell me before lawyers got involved. Anything at all. This was her chance. She looked straight at me and said no. Not even a pause this time. That was confirmation enough. After that conversation, she changed tactics again. She started bringing up money. What would happen to the house, to our accounts, to everything we built together? She asked if I really thought it was fair to punish her financially over emotional issues. That's when I understood something crucial. In her mind, the affair wasn't the real problem. The divorce was. Because divorce meant consequences, paper trails, questions she couldn't answer with charm. A few days later, I received an email from her lawyer. She'd hired one already. The tone was aggressive, accusatory, full of phrases like irreconcilable behavior and unilateral decisions. It painted me as unstable, reckless, unwilling to communicate. I read it twice, slowly. Then I forwarded it to my attorney without replying. That night, she confronted me again, angry now. She accused me of humiliating her, of blindsiding her, of trying to make her look bad. I asked her quietly how I could blindside someone who told me to divorce them. She had no answer. Instead, she told me something I hadn't expected. That the man I suspected was just a friend. That I was imagining things. That if I kept pushing this narrative, I'd regret it. Regret. There it was again. The same word she'd used months ago, back when I still cared enough to be scared by it. This time, it landed differently. Because I finally realized what she was really afraid of. Not losing me. Not losing the marriage. Losing control of the truth. That night, I went back to the synced messages one more time. I read them carefully, line by line, not emotionally this time. Strategically. I noticed details I'd missed before. Dates that overlapped with work trips, references to money, a casual mention of if things get messy, and buried in one thread, a sentence that made my stomach drop. Make sure he never finds out about the account. The account. I didn't know what account they were talking about yet, but I knew one thing. The story she was telling everyone was built on the assumption that I'd stay confused, emotional, and quiet. She never imagined I'd start connecting dots. And as I closed my laptop that night, one thought became painfully clear. The divorce wasn't going to be about who fell out of love. It was going to be about what she'd been hiding all along. And the closer we got to court, the more dangerous that secret became. From that moment on, the atmosphere in the house turned cold. Not loud, not explosive, controlled. We moved around each other like strangers who knew too much. Conversations were reduced to necessities. Who would be home late? Which bills were due? When the next meeting with lawyers would happen. She watched me more closely now. I could feel it. Anytime I picked up my phone, her eyes followed. Anytime I left the room, she asked where I was going. Not because she cared, because she needed to know what I knew. And I did something that surprised even me. I stayed calm. Not out of strategy, out of exhaustion. When you finally see the truth, the emotional chaos fades and something sharper replaces it. I wasn't trying to catch her anymore. I was trying to understand the damage. My lawyer asked me one question during our next call. Do you have any reason to believe there are hidden assets? I told him about the message, the account, the way money kept coming up in conversations that weren't really about money. He didn't sound shocked. He told me it was more common than people think, especially when someone believes they're already halfway out the door. That night I checked our finances again, slowly, line by line. Most of it looked normal, shared accounts, mortgage, bills, retirement, nothing obvious. But then I noticed something small, a transfer that repeated every few months, always under an amount that wouldn't raise flags, always labeled vaguely, consulting, reimbursement, miscellaneous. Individually, it meant nothing. Together, it formed a pattern. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I documented everything, dates, amounts, labels, because I finally understood the rules of this game. The first person to react loses. A few days later, she snapped, not in anger, in frustration. She accused me of being emotionally unavailable, of punishing her with silence, of turning our home into a hostile place. I asked her what she expected. She said she expected me to fight for her. That almost broke me, because fighting was all I'd ever done, just not for myself. She told me again that I was making a mistake, that divorce would ruin me financially, that I didn't understand what I was getting into. I asked her one thing. If you're so sure this will ruin me, why are you so afraid of it? She stared at me for a long moment. Then she looked away. That was the answer. A week later, she suggested mediation, framed it as maturity, cooperation, doing this the right way. My lawyer smiled when I told him. He said mediation only scares people who have something to hide. The pressure started mounting. Her family pushed harder. Her tone grew sharper. The kindness disappeared completely. And one evening, as we argued quietly in the kitchen again, she let something slip. She told me I was going to regret dragging other people into this. Other people, not lawyers, not family, people. That was the moment I realized the affair wasn't just emotional, it was entangled, money, planning, protection. She hadn't just imagined life after me, she had built parts of it already, and I was standing in the middle of it, finally seeing the structure. That night, I sent my lawyer everything I had, every screenshot, every note, every transaction I couldn't explain. He replied with one sentence: "Do not confront her anymore." That was fine by me, because soon I wouldn't have to. The next step wasn't going to be emotional. It was going to be official. And once it was, there would be no way for her to talk her way out of what she'd done. She thought she dared me to leave. What she actually did was give me time to prepare. The paperwork changed everything. Up until then, the divorce had lived in conversations, threats, tone shifts. The moment the documents were drafted, it became real in a way she couldn't dismiss or spin anymore. My lawyer sent them over late on a Thursday afternoon. I read every page slowly. Not because I didn't trust him, but because this was the line I couldn't step back over once I crossed it. Names, dates, assets, requests. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was a record. I signed. When she was served, she didn't react the way I expected. No screaming, no tears. She laughed. A sharp, disbelieving laugh, like she was watching someone else make a mistake. "You actually filed," she said. "Wow." I told her yes. That's when the mask finally slipped. She accused me of betrayal, of blindsiding her, of turning a private marital issue into a legal attack. She said I was cruel, calculated, that I'd changed. She was right about one thing. I had. Because this was the first time I wasn't asking her to choose me. I was choosing myself. She warned me again that I didn't know who I was messing with, that people wouldn't see things my way, that stories had a way of getting twisted. I told her I was okay with that. That answer scared her more than any argument ever had. The days that followed were tense. She packed a bag and left for a few nights, telling everyone I'd forced her out. She posted vague messages online about betrayal and strength. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly checked in, carefully neutral, clearly already briefed. But something else happened too. Her tone with me shifted from anger to urgency. She asked if we could handle things privately, if we could avoid digging into finances, if we could keep other people out of it. That was the confirmation my lawyer was waiting for. He filed additional requests, formal ones, the kind that required disclosure, bank statements, accounts, transfers, everything. The day she received that notice, she stopped pretending. She came home early, face pale, movements sharp. She demanded to know what I'd told my lawyer, how much I'd seen, what I thought I knew. I told her the truth. I don't know everything, but I know enough to ask questions. That's when she said something I'll never forget. She told me I was destroying lives. Not our marriage. Lives. And suddenly, I understood the scale of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about infidelity or emotional distance anymore. This was about money that wasn't supposed to be visible. About decisions made without me. About a future that didn't include me, but still depended on my silence. The point of no return didn't come with drama. It came with an email. A formal notice scheduling the next step. Once that date was set, everything changed. There would be no more private conversations. No more controlling the narrative. Soon, everything she'd hidden would exist on paper, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Except one thing, something she clearly hadn't ruled out yet. The days leading up to that date were the longest of my life. Not because I was afraid of what would come out, but because I could feel the pressure tightening around her. Every move she made felt rushed now. Every word carried an edge. She stopped pretending to be cooperative. Instead, she tried something else. She told me we should meet alone just once before everything became official. She said she wanted closure, peace, a way to end things without destroying each other. I almost said no, but part of me needed to see her one last time without lawyers in the room. Needed to hear what she would say when charm and control were her only tools left. We met in the house, late in the evening. The same kitchen where it all started. The lights low, the room quiet. She didn't sit. She paced. She told me I was being manipulated by my lawyer, that this process would leave me with less than I thought, that I was risking my reputation over misunderstandings. Then she changed tone. She said she still cared about me, that what happened wasn't what I thought, that things got complicated and went too far, but that didn't mean she didn't love me in her own way. I asked her directly about the account. The room froze. For a split second, she forgot to breathe. Then she laughed again. Too fast. Too loud. "You're really going to chase ghosts now?" she asked. I didn't argue. I told her disclosure would answer that question for both of us. That's when she dropped the last mask. She told me if I kept going, people would get hurt. That this wasn't just between us anymore. That there were agreements I didn't understand. Agreements. She asked me to reconsider, to withdraw some requests, to make this easier for everyone. I asked her one thing. Easier for who? She didn't answer. The night ended without resolution. She left angry and I stayed behind, standing in the kitchen where everything began. The next morning, I walked into the meeting expecting tension. What I didn't expect was silence. Her lawyer looked different, less confident. Papers spread across the table in a way that suggested damage control, not strategy. Then the documents started coming in, accounts that weren't disclosed at first. Transfers routed through third parties, money that didn't align with her income. Each page tightened the knot in my chest, not because I felt betrayed again, but because I realized how carefully this had all been hidden. The affair, the money, the timing. It wasn't reckless. It was planned. Halfway through, her lawyer requested a break. She couldn't look at me. When the meeting resumed, the tone had shifted completely. There were no accusations anymore, no threats. No lectures about patience or forgiveness, just questions, clarifying questions. And that's when I understood something quietly devastating. She hadn't dared me to divorce her because she didn't care. She dared me because she thought I'd never dig deep enough to find this. She was wrong. And as the meeting came to an end, one final detail surfaced. A transfer dated just days after she first told me she felt checked out of the marriage. The same week she stopped touching me. The same week she started planning her exit. And in that moment, sitting across from her in that room, I realized the truth was finally undeniable. This wasn't a marriage that failed. It was a marriage that had been quietly abandoned long before she ever said the words. And now, there was only one thing left to decide. What would happen next? When the meeting ended, no one stood up the way people do in movies. There was no dramatic slam of a folder, no shouting, just a quiet, heavy finality. Her lawyer gathered papers like someone trying to put a mess back into a box. My lawyer didn't celebrate. He just looked at me and asked if I wanted to step outside for a minute. I did. The hallway felt colder than the room. I leaned against the wall and stared at a framed print that meant nothing, trying to slow my breathing. Because the hardest part wasn't the money. It was the realization that the version of my life I'd been living hadn't been real for a long time. When we went back in, her posture had changed. Not angry anymore, not confident. Something closer to resignation. Her lawyer spoke first. He said formally that they wanted to revisit terms and discuss a more cooperative resolution. That was the first time I heard the word cooperative from their side without it sounding like a threat. She finally looked at me and said my name, not in a tender way, not in a loving way, like she was testing whether she still had access to me. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said. I almost laughed, because she did want it like this. She wanted it exactly like this, just with one difference. She wanted me quiet. I asked her calmly why she told me to divorce her if she didn't mean it. Her eyes flickered down for a moment, then back up. "I didn't think you would," she said. That was the most honest thing she'd said in months. She admitted she thought I'd back down, that I always backed down. That she'd gotten used to saying things she didn't have to own, because I would clean up the emotional mess afterward. And then, in a voice that was almost annoyed at herself, she added something that hit harder than any confession. "I didn't think you had it in you." There it was. Not love, not regret, a judgment. She had built her entire plan around her opinion of me, my weakness, my patience, my desire to keep the peace. And that's when I understood the real ending of our marriage. It wasn't the affair, it wasn't the money, it was the moment she stopped respecting me and started relying on that lack of respect as a strategy. My lawyer laid out the next steps: terms, deadlines, consequences if disclosures were incomplete. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. She barely spoke after that. When it was over, we walked to the parking lot separately. Outside, the sky was gray, the air sharp. She stood by her car like she wanted to say something that might fix the image of herself she could feel slipping away. "You're really going through with this," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. She looked at me like she was trying to find the old version of me, the one who would soften, apologize, reassure her that everything would be okay. I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something simple. The moment someone dares you to leave, they've already decided your presence isn't valuable. And when you accept the dare, they don't mourn you. They mourn the control they lost. I went home that night to a quiet house. Not empty. Quiet. I walked into the kitchen and saw the crack in the wall again. The same crack I'd stared at on the night she said those words. I realized I'd been living with that crack for years, pretending it wasn't growing. Now, it didn't matter anymore. Because I wasn't going to keep patching something that someone else kept breaking. I opened my phone and deleted the note full of dates. Not because it didn't matter, because I didn't need it anymore. The truth was on paper now. And as I stood there alone, I felt the strangest thing. Relief. Not because I won, but because I finally stopped begging to be loved by someone who was already gone. The next morning, I woke up and the first thing I noticed was the silence. No tension. No waiting for her mood. No fear of what sentence would be thrown at me next. Just a blank space. And for the first time, that blank space didn't feel like loss. It felt like room to breathe. I made coffee, stood at the counter, and looked out the window. And I realized that the most powerful thing I did in this entire story wasn't filing papers, it was believing her. When she said, "Then divorce me," she thought she was ending an argument. What she actually did was give me the clearest instruction she'd ever given me. And I finally listened.